Hey guys, welcome back for another quick episode here where we are really just going through my own thoughts about a contender who has been specifically active in this offseason with their moves, to say the very least, and that is the Los Angeles Clippers. Just a team who I view as second-class contenders competing in the Western Conference in just this next season. A team with some decently substantial roster moves that they've made, and it'll be interesting to look just how competitive and how threatening that this team can be at the top of the West. You talk about the championship window, it's really as wide as Kawhi and Harden go for this current roster construction. Obviously, James at this point in his career, he's not really a flippable asset by any means with his age and playoff troubles, and Kawhi, on the other hand, certainly aging too and doesn't possess the same trade value you'd expect a top 15 superstar to have on the market, really just because of the inconsistencies that do derive from the injuries. And so with a small winning window with their current foundation, it's really a big question mark for the Clippers this next season. Is this the make or break year? In terms of the offseason move, let's start with it. You re-sign Nico Batum, cheap, 2 years, $11.5 million, and you also bring back your offensive engine, James Harden, on a 2-year, $81.5 million extension to secure quite a bulk part of your foundation just in 2 re-signings alone. They're also active in free agency. They got Ty Washington. But the big stories were the signings of the super vets, Chris Paul and Brook Lopez. And then you pivot to the team swap, and you have the Clippers sending Norman Powell to the Miami Heat in exchange for basically what you get out of that deal, that 3-team deal, was John Collins. And not only do you bring in the more offensively gifted John Collins, but you also created enough cap room by getting rid of Norman Powell. And enough room in your lineup as well to be able to sign Bradley Beal for cheap to foundationally change the projected structure of your team. And so from these basic changes, the current roster construction looks something like a bit like a starting unit of either both James Harden and Bradley Beal making up your backcourt minutes in the starting lineup, and then you also have your frontcourt list of Kawhi, John Collins, and Ivica Zubac. And then the bench, which really has been the calling card for the Clippers in their competing years, which at this point, by personnel, may be the strongest that they've ever had on paper. You have Chris Paul, Chris Dunn, Derek Jones Jr., Brook Lopez, Nico Batum, and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Just an elite array of guys who can confidently supplement into a multitude of different situations, just with a substantially greater offensive ceiling now, especially from that starting unit. And moving out the scorching off-ball scoring Norman Powell for 2 more high-powered and more rim-pressuring guys like Bradley Beal and John Collins just lifts your baseline of offense more, especially for playoff basketball. And for developing and fine-tuning the offensive skill and creation talent on the roster, I just believe this Clippers team poses a much stronger threat now with John Collins and Bradley Beal. In terms of the actual bringing in Bradley Beal piece, you're bringing in someone who is a much stronger tertiary creation weapon next to Harden and Kawhi, someone who still has many of those tools that made him successful in Washington, and now you surround him with great culture and a clean slate away from the negative media that has plagued his name all through his quick Phoenix tenure. In Phoenix, though, obviously he copped a ton of hate, but Bradley Beal was extremely efficient in that period. Last year alone, we saw Bradley Beal was a 74% restricted area scorer. He scored 54% in the paint, non-restricted area, absolutely high level, and shot 39% on all threes. And that was good enough for a 57% effective field goal percentage. And for Beal, really, in the past few seasons, and being removed from the Washington scene, it's really been the off-ball value that has really clicked for him offensively. He's now a very good spot-up scorer with closeout attacking strengths from those previous days as a high-level rim pressure in Washington. And he's a plus out of off-screen and handoff actions now too, and still a very decent athlete. But I just think what the Clippers wanted compared to what they got from Norman Powell is the on-ball stability that Beal will be able to bring and has had a history of bringing to multiple teams. And I just think he's a bit more juiced up and a bit more reliable in terms of generating the efficient rim pressure pace that Norman Powell couldn't do from, the half-court scene as much. More just a stronger ball handling option overall, someone that can scorch looks from the mid-range, out of pick and roll, and provide stretches where he is using those explosive changes of pace and that agile frame to crack those lanes against slower wings. Obviously last year, Beal was far from elite in terms of the self-creation, but definitely not awful. There is still so much viable juice there for him to offer to this Clippers team. And out of ISOs, Brad was 0.93 points per possession. That was good enough for the 62nd percentile. Obviously, pick and rolls were a dimmer light. He was only scoring the ball at 0.85 points per possession. But for Beal, it's more about the role redundancy that did shine last year, and that did lead to lower volume and low rhythm of those types of possessions compared to his typical career standard. And when you aren't in rhythm, especially as a high-level volume scorer as well, that's just going to take out your effectiveness completely. Last season, Beal was involved in either ISOs or pick and rolls only for a total of around 5 possessions per game combined. And this is someone who only a few years ago was looking at 18 to 25 looks per night and 12 ISO/pick and roll possessions per game. And just this sort of value that is just not really put on display in Phoenix when you are sitting behind two much more extraordinary ball handlers. It doesn't mean that he can't necessarily still produce at this age. For me, it's just he was in a role where he was expected to be this off-ball powerhouse next to two obviously stronger shot creators, which was just the result of awful roster construction overall and just terrible decisions made to construct that roster, and really just far from what Beal's individual faults were. I don't think any of the blame should be shifted onto him. And I just think being in a situation, again, with their team culture and what the Clippers are trying to build, especially with the lengthy defensive supplements that they have now on the bench, I just think he's in a much better situation where his talents are more critically required. Now, next to James Harden, now with Beal, you're just getting a more athletic ball handler, someone who can provide those real second side shot creation reps. But now you can also look towards the off-ball value of Beal, which you wouldn't have been able to years prior. And that's really just come with Brad's scoring maturity at this point in his career, as well as just the overall skill and the role shift that he had in Phoenix. And now that the Clippers now have a legitimate superstar scoring core between James Harden, Bradley Beal, and Kawhi Leonard, guys who can, in theory, give you 3-level scoring with all the ball in their hands and also deliver off-ball as well. And this leads the talent of their offensive star foundation from the perimeter, which at the moment, if healthy and in rhythm, can no doubt rival some of the great teams in our league. Now, in terms of the multitude of archetypes that the Clippers have, and that's really what makes them special. They have obviously James leading at the helm of their ball handling. They have a mass volume advantage creator, sustainable pick and roll distributor, and still a strong scoring option who is coming off an All-NBA appearance averaging 23, 6, and 9. And that is pretty special to get at your one spot. Obviously with James, he has his downs, but in terms of floating regular season offense, he might be one of the GOATs. I mean, someone with a super simple recipe for possession-based success. Still at this age, still enough leverage with the jump shot still at this point where he can crack open lanes and angles with his hyperspeed reaction processing. Obviously, yes, he has lost much of that athletic base and that burst from his lower base, but he can still explode with that extreme core and leg strength, with the strong chest as well to force open those driving tracks, just overpowering his defenders' lateral stances. And if you play low on James's handle, he still can, in theory, punish you with the range. And overall, just still a premier passing point guard in this league. One of the best big rewarders in the game and of all time with those pocket passing angles, the deceptive pick and roll pressure with his head and ball fake use as well. And he just has so much strength and spatial awareness where he still just reads the ball so effortlessly and can make those more composed and timed cross-court reads. Just an absolute offensive maestro still in the regular season. And I think no doubt next season, I don't think we're going to see much regression from James. If not, he's going to be more in rhythm, understanding his role from the get-go, especially with Kawhi's inconsistencies with health. So basically put, I just think the regular season is no doubt safe in James's hands. Talk about the hezzy bag, the isolation greatness that he still possesses with that downhill polish on those floaters and passing reads. Just add to his arsenal, and with a relatively healthy trajectory for the Clippers, they can no doubt rely on James for that success, especially when you do have the Bradley Beal and Kawhi Leonard possibly missing some games due to age. And my only real question mark for James is just the playoff translation that we've seen from the past few years. Obviously, we've seen Harden time and time again lose his composure, lose his value, and that pace control in those playoff environments where the physicality does typically get the best of him. Obviously, in last year's first round, Harden gave the Clippers 19, 5, and 9 on only 51% effective field goal percentage. Not awful by any means, but from expectations and matchup favorability, we're talking about James Harden, who was extremely underwhelming in this series. You talk about 3 games with under 12 shots and coming in all of their losses as well in those games. And just losing aggression and confidence in your powers in a matchup that gave you legitimately 3 weak points to hunt and exploit on the floor at all times. You talk about this is a matchup where he was posed to have success from the get-go and he just couldn't deliver in those critical games. And when you're not getting the super value offensive dicing of what James Harden brings, there just isn't much to milk besides the general play initiation and table setting. And from your second fiddle, I just think that performance in that first round is simply not good enough to go into battle against these beastly West contenders. You're going to need James at the peak of his powers, as aggressive as he can be, next to a surging Kawhi Leonard if you want any chance of making some real damage in the West. But there is a reason why the Clippers are content with James as that secondary option, and that is really because, like I stated before, you need a surging Kawhi, but you really, overall for this Clippers team, you're so safe. You have one of the greatest scoring machines of all time who, when healthy, can absolutely destruct defenses and single-handedly win you multiple playoff games with this dead-set mindset of ruthless mismatch attacking, that pristine athletic weaponization on his jumpers, and the all-time elite muscle memory shot touch that he possesses. And when we are ranking Kawhi amongst the superstars of our league, the only real drawback to his game and team value is just the health concerns at this point, especially for his role. I mean, there aren't many more suited to purely dominate with better efficiency and reliability levels than Kawhi Leonard. And that is really where the Clippers' title hopes start and end. The thing with Kawhi that will be a worthy question is his contribution to off-ball value, especially as someone who typically works mostly as an on-ball machine, which next to both James Harden and Bradley Beal could present some level of redundancy in terms of the on-ball duties, but they all individually present separate archetypes, which is where my belief starts. Kawhi last season was an 85th percentile post-up machine, who at this point can really weaponize the strength and elevation pop coming out of pick and roll on those pull-up jumpers. But as a talent, in terms of the punishing closeout piece and working off the catch, I mean, simply put, he is one of the best in our league. And we saw it again, I mean, in that small 7-game sample size in the playoffs, Kawhi was on 1.48 points per possession on all spot-up possessions against the Nuggets. Just an all-time elite precision shot maker. And in terms of the physical presence and the advantages that he still possesses as a jump shooter, with the elevation, the balance, and the stability, to where he generates high-quality looks continually, I just think your superstar spot is completely safe with Kawhi Leonard. And if he is healthy and in rhythm, which is the biggest variable, obviously, with Kawhi, I still think the Clippers can hoist the title. And I think with the ceiling compared to their competition, like you talk about the starting unit for the Clippers, I mean, they have legitimate firepower that will give them success. I mean, you have the hyper-talented offensive front line as well. You get the elite rollman touch shot maker in Zubac, who provides real post-up value. But then you also slot in John Collins now, just your more athletic transition athlete, someone with more spacing traits that will allow him to slot next to Zubac relatively seamlessly. You talk about last season, I mean, he gave you 19 points and 8 rebounds, 40% on catch and shoot threes as well. That's some real talent to get for a pretty cheap price. And to get someone who can also provide that vertical spacing at the rim whilst also the screening versatility. And with that skill that he has, it's just a massive offensive boost for this starting unit. And if his athleticism and mobility can be harnessed, I mean, on the defensive side, we can see him playing some real physical resistance minutes against those post-up fulcrums, allowing Zubac to float more around the back line. And that's where really the Clippers could be a real threat against the Denver Nuggets. And with their depth as well, yes, it is quite aged and they do lack a ton of offensive athleticism particularly. You talk about the defensive floor and the talent that they can supplement. It's extremely valuable for playoff basketball where you do need to rally up as much talent as you can, as much playable talent as you can as well. You have Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr., 2 starters now coming off the bench. Your 2 primary perimeter stoppers, and then you also have Brook Lopez as well, continuing your drop coverage scheme from what Zubac when he needs his rest minutes as well. It's just a combination that is quite rare to offer from your bench. And really, the concerns mostly lie in the aggregate bench speed, especially between CP3, Brook Lopez, and Nico Batum coming off the bench. But as far as the offensive skill piece goes overall, there are drawbacks between their depth with an absence of truly capable two-way players, and that's why we might see Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr. struggle to get consistent minutes on the playoff field as well. But just in terms of the diverse range of guys that they can look to is quite impressive, and they still have Bogdan Bogdanovic, someone who is extremely playable, and you got CP3 still as a higher order pick and roll initiator. I just think the Clippers can definitely sufficiently provide enough sustainable execution to stabilize that starting rotation with whatever it is that is needed. I think on paper, the bench does look a bit better than it will turn out to be. But in games where Kawhi, Beal, and Harden will inevitably have to sit out due to their age and the toll a regular season takes on veteran stars, having guys like Chris Paul, Bogdan Bogdanovic, it just gives you enough life throughout the 82. And with other guys like Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr. who can offer true star-level defensive value, allowing the Clippers to lean onto that hellacious defensive identity, it's so valuable to their regular season floor if injuries do knock their way like they probably will. Look, I think the Clippers, looking at them right now, they look quite matchup dependent overall. And that is a big limitation of their current roster construction. I just think with their starting unit particularly, they match up quite strongly with Denver. Once again, with your Zubac, Lopez, and Collins options to throw at Nikola Jokic, with also a strong perimeter attack between your two guard slots, being able to attack Jamal Murray as much as you can. Maybe you can have some success against a Cam Johnson between Bradley Beal and James Harden. That will allow the Clippers to be able to create a relatively consistent offense throughout another Denver series. And similarly, I also think against the Rockets as well, there's definitely an avenue for winning with their ability to load up the mobility size on their front line. Yeah, they can also offer substantially more skill and versatility in their front line as well, so they have that big advantage there. Obviously, their point of attack weaknesses in the starting unit defensively between Harden and Beal, they'll be less vivid and less brought to light, especially when you are tasked with defending a Fred VanVleet and Amen Thompson backcourt as well. And just overall, I think they would have enough firepower to outlast the Rockets, especially if you can neutralize KD with a Kawhi matchup as well. But when you look at the rest of the West, against OKC, I'm not sure how well they match up. Yes, they have physicality, but I just don't see a path where James and Beal can create sufficient driving pressure against that OKC point of attack. And with a team that can mightily load up and rotate against Kawhi's lack of pure passing especially, I just think they would struggle in an OKC matchup at the moment. I don't think they would be clear-out favorites if they were to play a locked-in Lakers squad with the offensive potential and ceiling between the dominant backcourts as well. Luka at his best can float elite offense extremely well, and against that backcourt, especially where Kawhi would naturally be tasked against stopping LeBron, when you have Luka and Austin Reeves just being able to pick on whoever they want from that starting backcourt, and you can stretch out John Collins to the perimeter as well, where he is a weaker switchable big. I just think there are just too many favorable advantages for that Lakers, for the Los Angeles Derby to not be an extremely competitive series either. You also have teams like a healthy Mavs squad and a tenacious Wolves team as well, who could give them a great run, overpowering them with waves of both physicality and athleticism, wearing down both James and Brad throughout a 7-game series. So I just don't really think that there is they present as a standout favorite. I know they've made moves and the offense looks really nice, but obviously there's just so many teams that can present so many different threats to them, and that's where I do think the matchup dependence will bite them. Obviously, definitely they are still a threat, and to the best, you talk about Denver and the Rockets, who they do match up well against, and if they do get the right pathway with some injury luck and a mutual understanding of their dying championship window between the stars, having an engaged James Harden and an engaged Bradley Beal, they can certainly hit a conference finals level of basketball. And that is really where my faith is for this Los Angeles Clippers team to put together an extremely exciting season next year, backed by the moves that they've made. And that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that quick dive into the Clippers roster construction. And I'll be hitting some more exciting teams as the season does approach. We are in August, only a few months prior to the season starting, and we're not far before training camp comes along. So we will be hitting some of the most exciting teams and contenders that we have going into next season very soon.